In this section of the course, we're going to talk about Notion databases. Databases in Notion are basically the single thing that make Notion the powerful tool that it is. Using Notion databases is crucial to having a well-organized and well-performing Notion workspace. And before you're like, oh, I don't want to use Notion databases, that's way too complicated, databases sound so technical. Yes, it does, but it actually isn't as complicated as you might think. So if you ever use something like Google Sheets or Excel, then it's actually not that different. There are some differences, but it's actually pretty similar in many ways. And we're actually going to go through all of this in a very slow way. We'll discover all the features one by one. And we'll also work with many different practical projects, so you'll get a good understanding of how it works. So let's first look at an example of this. In here, I have a database for recipes, and we're going to take a look at this view, which is the table view. So basically, it's a table representation of data that we have, and each of the rows is one recipe. Now, for each of these recipes, we have different properties. So we have the name, I've added a rating, and I've also added a type. And there's the URL. And if we scroll to the side, we'll also see the prep time. So these are all the different properties that we added to this database. Now, these properties are used to give context to your individual database entries. So this allows you to organize your content in different ways. For example, we can apply filters to our database, or we can sort our data based on different properties. If we go over to the right side, we can actually add a new property here as well. And that's what we're going to do because I want to show you all the different properties that we have available. So if I click on this, we'll see this new column pops up here, and we'll get this little window here where we can add the property. First up, we can actually add the name. So we'll just say test property in this case, because it's not going to be an actual property. And then we can actually set the type of this property as well. So the default is just text. So this would just be, a text field, like this, where I can put in text. This is text. But we also have lots of other properties available to us. So for example, the next one would be a number. So this would obviously just be a number. Could be something like 69. And then we can also add a unit to this. So we could say this is in pounds, or we could say this is in Mexican pesos, something like this. We could also say it's a number with commas. We could say it's something else. So you get the idea, it's a number property. Next, we have the select and the multi-select properties. These are properties that let you select one or multiple values from a given list. So for example, I can show you this with the prep time. The prep time is a select property. So you see this if you click on the prep time and click on edit property, it's select. And now we have these different values in here. So I have different preset prep times. And we can choose one of these times for every of our database entries. So 15 minutes, I could say 30 minutes, or anything like that. But we only get to choose one. And that's the difference between select and multi-select. For the type over here, we actually have a multi-select, and that means we can select multiple of these values that we created in here. So this recipe over here, the chocolate cake, I could say this is both a dessert and a snack, for example. And now this would be both added to this row in the database. These values actually don't come from thin air, but instead we can create them. So I could say I want to have both a dinner and a lunch option. So I could just add a new tag here and then click on create this new tag. And now this will be added to our selection, and we can use that for the other recipes as well. There are lots of additional property types, but I don't want to show you all of them for now because it doesn't make much sense for me to just go through them one by one. I'll just tell you what they are, and then we'll discover how to use them later in the course. So here, instead of the number, we could also select a date. So this would just be obviously a date. If you have multiple people in your account, you can also choose a person. So you can, for example, assign a certain task in a task database to one of your colleagues or to yourself. You can upload files like logos or just PDFs or anything else using the files and media property. You can have checkboxes, and that's actually pretty neat because you can do lots of stuff with them. Again, something we'll do later in the course as well. And you can have URLs, emails, phone numbers, and so on. There are some advanced properties as well, but we'll cover them in more detail later in the course. Now, just having this table of data wouldn't be that special. After all, that's what many of the other spreadsheet tools also do. But Notion has additional options here. And what I want to highlight here is that you can actually open each of these database rows up as their own pages. So if I click on open, it will open up this page in this kind of preview window. So you can actually take a look at the page and see what we have on here. So here you see we actually have a recipe. The formatting isn't that great, but still we do get this recipe. And this is basically a full page. So if I click on open as a page to open it as a full page, this is just as much of a page as any other page in Notion. So you can add blocks in here. You could say you want to add a heading like this. You can add bulleted lists with something. You can also add another database in here, or you could add another page in here. So you can endlessly nest down these elements however you like them. And that's what makes these Notion databases so powerful, because you basically have all the capabilities of Notion inside of these databases as well. And you can nest them however you like to create a structure that works for you. So sometimes you might have databases inside of databases in certain use cases. So yeah, that is what makes Notion so special. The next big feature Notion databases have is the ability to view our data in different views. So this basically means that we can take different angles to look at the data we have in our database. For example, there's a view called the gallery view. And this is, in contrast to the table view, much more visual. So it gives you a visual gallery of all the entries in your database. So all the table rows basically became these cards here. So basically all the table rows in our table became cards in our gallery database. So you see the chocolate cake, that became this card over here. And again, if we click on that, it's just the same page we just saw. So the data didn't change, but we are just looking at the data in a different way. So this view might be better for more visual things, while the table might be better for things that have a lot of numbers in them. So like calculations, a revenue dashboard, or things like this. Another view that's really powerful is the board view. And this view allows you to organize your data in a Kanban style board. So I don't know if you've heard of Kanban before, but it's basically a really popular choice for project boards. Where you have different kind of columns and they are organized by different criteria. So in this case, we're actually organizing this board by the type of recipe that we have. Now, what's awesome about all these views is that you can actually move these elements around inside of these views. So let's say I want the chicken, like the Mediterranean chicken over here. I don't want that to be a dinner anymore. I want that to be a breakfast recipe. So I can just drag that over to breakfast, and then it will be added here in the breakfast category. And if we now go back to the table and look for our Mediterranean chicken, where is it? Yeah, over here. So now it's in the lunch and the breakfast category because we dragged it over to the breakfast as well. So this basically allows us to change the properties of individual entries in our database just by moving them around in different places. Now there are a couple of additional views that Notion has, and we're going to talk about all of them in one of the upcoming videos. The last thing I want to talk about is that there are different ways of actually adding these Notion databases to your Notion pages. Now this right here is what you would call a full page database because it takes up the full page, and we actually couldn't add any other content to this page. So you notice how we can't add anything down below. We only can add content right into the database. So this basically takes up the entire page, and you can't add any additional content besides the database. You also have the option to add inline databases, which would allow you to add additional content besides the database. And you can actually switch back and forth between the two easily. So let me show you how to do this. So I've got this database here on this page, but if I go to the parent page, which is where I have like a couple of my demonstration pages set up, and I click on this this database page. So this is basically the database, the full page database. I get this option to turn this database inline. And if I click on that button, it will actually turn the database into an inline database, which will now be part of this page that I was just on. Similarly, you can actually do the exact opposite by now clicking on that inline database and then going to turn into page. And this will turn the inline database back into an actual page. So now we have the full page database again. In the next videos, we'll learn a lot more about Notion databases. So don't worry if you don't quite get it right now. It's complicated. Sometimes it can be hard to understand how things work and how things are related to each other. But I promise you that if you practice a bit more and we do a bit more exercises around databases, you'll quickly get the hang of it and see how it works. So see you in the next videos.